A Kansas casino is betting on lawmakers approving sports gambling. But is it a winning bet? Plus, a plea to keep the Holocaust out of debates over vaccine mandates in Kansas. But first, Kansas gets a little bit darker as the state allows private companies to decide what counts as public records. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. We'll get to those stories in a bit, but first, we learned Friday the state's top health leader is leaving the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. The governor made the announcement in a news release Friday morning, thanking Dr. Lee Norman for his service. The Kansas Reflector reports the sudden resignation comes after months of discussions with the governor's office over whether Norman was ready to leave state government. While Norman led the state's fight against the coronavirus pandemic from the very beginning, often seen standing at the governor's side as she updated the state on new pandemic precaution orders, he stepped back from the public eye over the summer after what the Reflector calls a tense exchange in June with the governor's chief of staff. Now, the Reflector reports the chief of staff, Will Lawrence, wanted Norman to stay in his lane and avoid sensitive political issues when speaking with the news media. In making the announcement of Dr. Norman's departure, Kelly said, quote, his and his team's work to help keep Kansans safe during this once-in-a-century public health crisis has cemented his place as the most consequential Secretary of Health and Environment in Kansas history. The release quotes Norman as saying, while leaving was not an easy decision, I have no doubt that the leadership will maintain a seamless continuity of operations as the agency continues its transition from crisis response to steady state. KDHE Deputy Secretary Ashley Goss will temporarily stand in for Norman until Kelly can name a permanent replacement, expected to happen sometime in the next few weeks. There's no word yet on what Norman plans to do next. Here to help us shed some light on the issue and many other issues this week, we have State Representative Nick Hoheisel, a Wichita Republican, and by Zoom, State Representative Sidney Carlin, a Democrat from Manhattan. Thank you both so much. And Sidney, we've got you up on the screen, so we'll start with you. The Secretary of Health and Environment has been perhaps much more public over the last couple of years than historically would have been so. And I think maybe people realize now it's a much more important role than might have not thought before.
He's definitely been front and center on stage this last couple of years. And what a terrible task it's been to run that agency, as well as to handle all of the COVID related issues, which have totally dominated our state and our world for the last almost 2 years now. Yeah. So yes, it's been a really huge task. Yeah. And I do appreciate very much all he's done. Yeah.
And certainly become a very public task that not normally would have been public, but also become much more politicized than we normally would have seen for a Secretary of Health and Environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that Dr. Norman, when he signed up for this job, didn't really realize or think about, like many of us, what he was getting into with the pandemic or anything. I think something that is worrisome is it seems that the governor's office and the administration and our top public health official were feuding these last few months since the summer as we're fighting the Delta wave of the COVID variant. So that's a little worrisome. I'm not sure about all the details of the resignation yet, but that kind of sets off a red flag of how did this feud impact our response to the Delta variant. Yeah.
Well, and another concern, of course, is this is all coming as we hit another beginning of what appears to be another surge. And Sidney, I know in a lot of communities, and I presume that Manhattan is the same, numbers are starting to go back up again. And yes, we now have a temporary head of the department.
Yes, but she's been there all along, and I have talked with her many times. I have not talked to Lee Norman directly on the issues that I wanted help on, because she was always able to give us the support we need, and she could do the talking to the agency head. I've often talked to the KDHE directors over the years about Medicaid expansion, about the pharmaceutical drug issues, and pig farms, and all kinds of health agency problems. And I've always found the staff very supportive and very helpful to me in any of the things I've taken to them. This time, I really never did bother the chief about my questions because someone else could forward those and didn't have to ask him every one of us when we all ask the same questions.
And definitely an important point there, Sydney, that you made, that while most of us now think of this position in relationship to the pandemic and COVID, it covers a wide range of health issues.
It certainly does, and it is very difficult. They have to shut down pig farms or cattle lots or something. They have to be on top of all those things. So, and that's what I've had to deal with with them, not with Dr. Norman ever, but in the past. And so, it's the public health, as water and all the things that we need to protect us, and it's quite a big job. So I can see that a little bit of stress might be involved in this. I don't know anything about it, so I'm not saying it is.
No.
But on everyone's part, we've all been stressed.
Oh yeah, no doubt about that. Definitely stressed. And as a new secretary is appointed, of course, has to be approved by the Kansas Senate.
Yeah, absolutely. She'll have to be confirmed. That process, I assume, will take place in January when we start session back up, and those hearings, I'm sure, will be charged, and there's going to be a lot of tough questions that she'll have to answer, and we'll have to let the process play out.
Yeah. Well, some tough questions coming from the media on a completely different topic involving the state. A primary purpose of this show is to help the public keep an eye on what state and local governments and lawmakers in Kansas are up to. But the state continues to get a failing grade when it comes to letting the public in on what it's up to. Now, private companies are getting a say, as Celia Yopis-Jepson of the Kansas News Service showed us this week.
I asked Kansas for some public records about the money it spends on prescription drugs for state employees. It didn't go very well. Here are the papers. How many prescriptions CVS processed for Kansas is blacked out. The dispensing fees that Kansas pays, blacked out. The last 4 pages, just a sea of black. This is a publicly funded audit of $160 million in drug spending. Now, weirdly, Kansas didn't black out these documents. A private company did. Kansas let the auditor it hired, Pilar RX, hide public information. Bernie Rhodes at law firm Lathrop GPM says that is not okay.
When you feed from the public trough, the public is entitled to know what comes out the other end.
Pilar RX fed from the public trough. Kansas paid it $100,000, but Pilar RX had promised CVS, the firm it was hired to watchdog, to keep details of its audit secret. So when I asked for the report, Kansas let Pilar RX redact the pages.
That's absurd.
Rhodes leads a national team of lawyers that handle cases about the First Amendment, freedom of information, and he says it doesn't matter if Pilar RX or Kansas signed non-disclosure agreements with CVS. Kansas has to follow its own open records law.
It's absurd to claim that a non-disclosure agreement prevents them from complying with the Kansas Open Records Act.
I've asked Governor Laura Kelly's office for an interview about this several times. No luck. But in a public meeting, one of the state's lawyers did defend how Kansas handled my open records request, while also kind of blaming Pilar RX for the whole situation. Here's that lawyer.
I won't say I completely 100% agree with Pilar RX on what they view as a trade secret or proprietary and confidential.
And yet state lawyers let Pilar RX black things out anyway. This is exactly why government transparency groups are sounding an alarm. They say governments are more interested in pleasing the private sector than doing their public duty. And not just in Kansas. Here is Amazon touting its new headquarters in Virginia.
Today, more than 1,600 Amazonians are already in Arlington, working at HQ2.
Virginia didn't just promise big tax incentives. It also promised Amazon that if any citizens asked for public records involving the company, Virginia would black out as much of the documents as it could. Next, Oregon. Google uses a lot of water there to cool huge warehouses full of computer servers, and it wanted more water for more servers. The city of the Dalles was on board, but water supplies were limited, so residents had questions. In a recent public meeting, city officials wouldn't answer a big one.
Did you actually tell us how much water Google is expecting to use?
I did not.
The Oregonian newspaper pressed to see city water records. The city refused. It had promised Google it would fight open records requests and told the Oregonian that Google's water use is a trade secret.
This is not a Kansas problem. It's not an Oregon problem. It's an everywhere problem.
Frank Lamonti is director of the Breckner Center for Freedom of Information in Florida.
Private businesses are getting more and more aggressive about trying to claw back more of their information out of the public record.
And plenty of governments are going with the flow, like Kansas inviting Pilar RX to redact the CVS audit.
When you actually hand the document over and you invite people to use the black magic marker, they have every incentive to overuse it.
So what now? If a city or state violates open records laws, they can lose in court. But Lamonti says cities and states aren't too worried about that. They figure lots of newsrooms today don't have the budget to haul them to court. For the Kansas News Service, I'm Celia Yopis-Jepson.
Now, this comes on the heels of a story I did actually about a year ago now, but it's repetitive, where we did a document request from the Department of Labor and they wanted $40,000 for it. From excessive bills to allowing private businesses, Kansas really has a very bad reputation amongst journalists, amongst other activists, for not allowing public records to be public. Obviously, it bothers us. As a lawmaker, what do you think about it?
It bothers me as well. When I first ran for election a few years ago, one of my platforms was transparency in government. A lack of transparency is a reason for the distrust of government. This was a really well done story. I think it opened a lot of eyes. This may be something that the legislator needs to come back next year and take a look at, because what the media does and what journalists do is vital to having an open democracy and holding ourselves accountable, holding lawmakers accountable. It's incredibly important. So I'm glad the story was done. I'm glad there's light shedded on it, and we'll see if we can take a look next year about some changes.
And Sydney, I'll ask you that same question. Does this bother you?
It does bother me a great deal. This particular incident does not bother me because they are following the statute that we passed. Since I've been in the legislature, I'm starting 20 years in January. We've voted on several open meetings, open records acts that I have opposed because I'm a journalist by background. My mass comm is my major. It's my belief, and as a public servant in the city commission role, I struggled to get information when we were doing economic development packages for new businesses. For example, we tried to get the Cessna plant into Manhattan, and it went to Independence, and I was on the commission. Couldn't find out anything about what we were offering them at all. It was proprietary, and as a commissioner, I wasn't allowed to find out. So I really don't like that kind of work. It bothers me a great deal. But we did pass a statute somewhere along the way that allows for just what happened. And so companies are aware of that. They lobby for those things. And they get them passed.
Yeah, and they get them
passed.
passed.
In the name of economic development and capitalism and growth, they get those things passed. And it passed. I'm sure I didn't vote for it because I almost never can imagine I would.
Okay, well, we're going to take another look at a different issue here. State lawmakers set to return to Topeka Monday for what leadership hopes will be a one-day special session. Their goal, to pass bills they believe will protect Kansans from the impact of federal vaccine mandates. But after speakers raised the specter of the Holocaust in discussing the mandates earlier this month, some Jewish leaders are asking lawmakers to keep their history out of the debate Monday. Rebecca Chung of the KSN Capitol Bureau shows us how this all got started.
Up until last week, Republican leaders were silent on the issue. Now lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are speaking out against this, calling it anti-Semitism. The same goes for leaders in the Jewish community that I spoke with. They say they're outraged by the comments that have been made, and also that it shows major gaps in how people understand history.
We're not talking about millions of people being killed here. So I think you need to be respectful to Jewish people.
Fights breaking out at the State House over Jewish symbolism being tied to coronavirus vaccine mandates. One man from Kansas City wearing the Star of David on his chest, comparing the mandate to Jewish oppression during the Holocaust, one of the largest genocides in history.
Definitely moving in that direction. When has anybody had the right to tell you what?
No, there have been over 760,000 people killed by COVID.
Senator,
so please sit down with that and take that off.
This coming after a Republican lawmaker compared the mandate to the Holocaust in another hearing. Now leaders in the Jewish community are speaking out, calling the comments unacceptable.
I think that they'd like these representatives not to bring the Holocaust into these modern political discussions because they have nothing to do with each other.
Political experts agree, calling on people using the symbolism to do better to stay informed, especially in areas with smaller Jewish populations.
One of the reasons we see anti-Semitism is because we're talking about a minority community. For some people, it's much easier to discriminate against people who are a relatively small number.
The tragedy of the Holocaust is not in any way the same as being asked to comply with certain restrictions for the health and safety of everyone.
And just recently, Republican leadership did issue a statement on social media strongly condemning the comments that were made during these hearings, calling the comparison inappropriate and bearing no resemblance to the current issues that are being debated. At the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
A very direct request from Jewish leaders across the state. Is there, Sydney, a way to keep what is still a very heated debate from going down these same lines again on Monday?
I can't imagine anyone saying the things that were reported said, any elected officials saying any of those things about anybody. But there's no preventing. People are looking for news to pick them up and trying to get a little campaigning done and getting their name out there and join up with the movement, and they're on the bandwagon, and things are coming out of people's mouths that I can't imagine them saying. And I'm very disturbed by this. I think, if I understand this right, it had to do with the fact that somebody said if you wear a mask, you're targeted, or you feel targeted as the Jewish people felt targeted with their stars. I don't like that at all. I don't like that comment at all. But I do think when I wear my mask to church and I'm the only one wearing the mask, I do think people might wonder if I have not been vaccinated. But they can wonder, or they can ask me. You know, I'm cool about that. But I do it because I know a lot of people are not vaccinated, and I need to protect myself.
Yeah. Nick, what about you? Do you see a way to keep this from coming back up again?
Yeah, so let me just start off by saying I think the actions of the gentleman last week with the Star of David were horrendous. They were an insult to our Jewish community. We can disagree about vaccine mandates all we want. I know me and Representative Carlin probably have different views on the vaccine mandate, but we don't have to invoke the Holocaust. At no point should the Holocaust, other than remembrance or education, should the Holocaust ever be invoked. It's not a political football to kick back and forth. I was disturbed about, as Representative Carlin was, about what we heard last week. It's just, there's never a time for that. There's never a time for that. We need to be more respectful, especially to our Jewish friends and our Jewish community, and just stick to the issues.
All right. Well, one issue that I know you guys are dealing with. Yes, quickly.
I might make a comment, and I agree with Representative Hoheisel totally on that. But I think we're also invoking religion inappropriately in this debate because there are people who have reasons not to be vaccinated, and I will go along with that. And the mandate included an alternative testing each week. And there are, there were things that were done in that mandate to allow for differences. And that's what it seems to be ignored. But I know that the Pope of the Catholic Church, and I am Catholic, has always supported that we get our vaccines, and he has said the religious exemption, is not good enough in this case because of the offsetting lives saved, and it's a life issue, and that's been his position. And as a leader of the world, at least, I hate to see religion used as an issue. I know if I had an anaphylactic reaction to any kind of vaccine, I would want an exemption. And that's my position, and others that I've talked to have said those people should be allowed not to take a vaccine of any kind. Okay. But I haven't had that, and most of us haven't.
And that's certainly some of the things we're going to hear in that debate. I'm sure that we're going to see on Monday. But moving from one political battle to another, lawmakers are gearing up for round 2 of redistricting public comment sessions next week. Those meetings will stretch from Atchison to Great Bend and run all through the week. We go back to Rebecca Chung for a look at predictions for what will come from all this.
Lawmakers are planning to meet here at the State House with a busy week ahead, going into a week of redistricting town hall meetings. Now, these meetings and plans to redraw maps next year could lead to Republicans being the only party representing the state in Congress. Now, Sharice Davids is the only Kansas Democrat in Congress right now. Now that her district is overpopulated, it gives Republicans an incentive to set new lines and hurt Davids politically. Now, the state is hosting another round of town halls to gather input from Kansans before they go to draw party lines. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle say this is a critical process, and they're hoping to get as much feedback from the public as possible.
What we're really looking for is people to tell us about your communities and what has changed over the last 10 years. Because as we're back up here drawing maps, you don't always see what happens exactly on the ground. And the point is that what do you want us to be thinking about when we're drawing maps? And that comes a lot from this input we're receiving right now from the public.
Now, the governor does have the power to veto maps under certain conditions, but with Republicans holding a supermajority in the state's legislature, they could override the governor's veto. In the end, the Supreme Court would still have to approve of those final maps. At the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
All right. And Nick, you are on that redistricting committee, going to be sitting in on those meetings. There was a lot of talk, a lot of criticism the first time around. Is this second set of meetings to help alleviate some of those concerns that were raised?
I think that's part of it, and part of it is we genuinely want the feedback. We want to hear from folks. Now that we have the census data wasn't out during our first set of redistricting meetings. We have the census data now, and we can get more input from folks, and more input is always a bonus, especially when we're talking about district lines that will impact the state for 10 years. So I'm looking forward to the meetings next week. I'm looking forward to hearing from folks and go for there.
Yeah. What about the comment that so many have made that it really doesn't matter what's said at these meetings? Republicans are going to do what Republicans are going to do.
As a member of the committee, I would strongly disagree with them. I have a notebook full of notes that I took during the last set of meetings. I'll take another notebook full of these meetings. I've read every piece of testimony that's been submitted.
All right, and we're going to wait and see what happens at those meetings.
Absolutely.
It's not legal yet, but at least one Kansas casino is betting it will be. We're talking about the legalization of sports gambling online. KICK's Hannah Baker takes a look at the latest push.
While it's still illegal here in Kansas, the ability to bet on your favorite live sports might soon be a reality, which some Kansans say could be a game changer.
I think it'd be really good for the economy. It'd be something fun for people to do.
Kyle Rickliff says he's even placed bets in some places where it's already legal, like Nevada and Colorado.
I think that people see Kansas as more of a conservative, slow-to-react state that is stuck in its ways.
Tuesday, the Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Dodge City even placed its bets on legislation getting passed soon and partnered with the mobile sports gambling company DraftKings. Political experts say they still aren't sure if something will get passed by lawmakers.
I don't see the opposition to it being changed by the existence of an arrangement like this.
But the announcement will likely keep the conversation going.
Might enable them to go forward and say, look, this isn't speculative. We really are talking about jobs here. We really are talking about economic growth here.
After a Supreme Court ruling, 29 states have now legalized sports gambling. Even so, Kansas Representative John Barker says today's announcement sounds premature.
We've had that issue before the legislature probably for the last 3 years, and we've been unable to get a bill out because the casinos haven't really wanted to work with us as far as
But he anticipates lawmakers will work another bill this year if they see a better offer that helps put more money back into the state.
People would like to be able to bet on a K-State or a KU ball game, but they would like to do it locally, not necessarily driving to a casino.
And Sydney, I know every time I speak with Kansans on the street about this issue, the response is overwhelmingly they want to see it happen here in Kansas. Is this something that we finally see pass this next session?
I think I'll go with Representative Barker on that. I think one of the problems is whenever a bill comes to our floor for a vote, it's subject to amendments. And the casino percentages is an issue that some would like to see some different arrangements made on that. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons it's not getting there. He kind of hinted at that, and I don't want to put words in his mouth. But I know I never supported gambling in any form. During the last, when we went to allowing the casinos, I was a no. But over the time that we didn't have any tax income coming in for about 8 or 9 years, the only thing that kept us going really was gambling.
That's an interesting point.
We've had a bad couple years here with COVID, and I don't know what the impact on that industry has been, but it'll be back. If it isn't good right now, it'll be back someday, and it is a real moneymaker for Kansas. But I vote no because it's a real money spender for families, and people have real addictions to going in, and especially online. So I'm nervous about that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are. Nick, I know you have a great interest in this. Very quickly, do you see it passing or not?
I think there's definitely momentum towards it. We worked a bill last year in the House. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. I voted yes, but I think there's momentum. I think it's messy, but it's going to get done this year.
All right. Well, and that is all the time we have. Otherwise, we would dig deeper into that issue because it brings a lot of talk every time.
Absolutely.
So, Nick, Sydney, thank you both so much for joining me this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, Cake News, and KSN News for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue the conversation with you online. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For now, stay safe and have a great Thanksgiving. We'll be back December 17th.